Women make up 50% of the world's population, but contribute only 37% to global GDP. And McKinsey Global in a 2018 report finds that $12 trillion can be added to the global GDP by 2025 if we are able to close the gender gap. Interestingly, Sri Lanka is the only South Asian country that achieved the Millennium Development Goal of universal primary education, as well as parity in secondary education. So we have a highly skilled female population. However, in contrast, the female labor force participation remains at 35%, actually a drop over the last about 4 to 5 years. And a 2019 report by the IFC studying listed companies in Sri Lanka reports that we have 8.2% women on boards, which is lower than more progressive economies in the Asia Pacific region, which are more about 13% women on boards. So as companies operating in Sri Lanka especially, it's important for us to understand what this gap is, what is contributing to the gap, whether it is the workforce or whether it is leadership positions in industries where you do get women coming into the workforce. The research done over the last about 2 decades is overwhelming and clear. There is a lot of positive correlation between better gender representation and financial results, better ESG indicators, more innovation, more resilience in times of financial turbulence. So we've identified as companies, most of us in this forum, that better representation, gender representation in our workforce, but also in our leadership teams is not only the right thing to do, but that it is an economic and business need. So our topic for today's discussion is affirmative action for gender equality in the workplace. And we want to talk about what affirmative action is, why active intervention is necessary, what the challenges are, and what it looks like when companies have policies, infrastructure, support systems that create a more equitable playing field for men and women both. And I could not be more excited to have the panel that we do today, individuals who have expertise and knowledge, both from a global and local perspective, supporting governments, private sector, and civil society on this journey of creating more gender equal workplaces. If I might introduce our panel today, we have Koh Miyaoi, Asia Pacific Gender Team Leader and Gender Advisor for UNDP. Koh is a gender equality expert with 25 years of professional experiences in multidisciplinary sustainable development. She's held positions with the UN Division for the Advancement of Women, UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, UNDP Thailand. She's been part of the UNDP Regional Center Colombo and many other postings globally. She continues to provide policy advisory, programming, and management capacity building in collaboration with civil society, governments, and private sector partners. So thank you and welcome, Koh. We also have Mr. Bhatia Bulumulla, Director and CEO of Elpitiya Plantations PLC. He is a member of the National Institute of Plantation Management, a visiting lecturer at Wimber University, an honorary board member of the Plantations Human Development Trust, and he is also the chairman of the Planters Association of Ceylon. We then have Nadeesha Wijesingha, Senior Leadership Development Manager and HR Business Partner for Unilever Sri Lanka. Thank you, Nadisha, for being part of this panel. Nadisha is an HR professional with 22 years at Unilever. She started in the field of marketing and then moved on after 14 years in marketing to an HR human resources role. Nadisha is also a certified life coach and a mindfulness practitioner and trainer. Finally, but very importantly, we have Troy Roderick, Director Strategic Initiatives and Insights, Male Champions of Change. Troy specializes in diversity and inclusion and has been in the field for over 25 years. Troy's work has achieved record levels of women's representation in executive management, CEO leadership teams, and graduate cohorts. Troy is also on the advisory board of the Women's Leadership Institute and the steering committee for the University of Sydney's Women, Work and Leadership Research Group. So welcome, panelists, and thank you for accepting our invitation. This will be an extremely interesting conversation for all of us to understand what affirmative action is, why this whole question of better gender balance in our workplaces is important. So without further ado, let me hand over to Koh to give us an explanation and maybe an overview of what affirmative action is and what your experience and what your views have been from a global and a local perspective. Over to you, Koh.
Thank you, Thanuja. And thank you for inviting me to join this very important conversation. I think, you know, working for an international development organization which advocate for gender equality in different contexts, we also need to walk our talk. So this conversation around ensuring our workplace, our own workplace, is safe and inclusive and welcoming is very important agenda for our organization, and we still have a lot to learn, and I'm looking forward to learning a very inspiring and pioneering practices from other panelists, and also hopefully from the audience as well. But just to talk about affirmative action, and to, in many ways, I think affirmative action is mostly used to describe interventions to improve gender balance representation in political context. I think this is what the most people are familiar with, and that's, you know, also known as gender quota. And the very important aspect of that intervention is that it is meant to be temporary. So the temporary nature of affirmative action is a given when we talk about gender equal representation in political representation. Now, talking about affirmative action in a workplace, I do think that temporary nature still matters, because we are doing we would be implementing affirmative action because we want to achieve certain goal, and once that goal is achieved, we need to be giving that particular you know, doing that particular intervention. So there could be a temporary nature still valid for talking about affirmative action in workplace. I also want to make a point that we must not confuse affirmative action with preferential treatment. And I think this is often happens when we talk about affirmative action to increase the number of women in a given situation, political representation or gender equality at the workplace. A concern is raised about whether we are just giving preferential treatment for women. No, we have this historical background where women had not been treated equally as men, which created today's gender imbalance. And affirmative action would be introduced to redress that incorrect practices of the past. Once that is sorted, we can do away with that particular affirmative action. Having said that, affirmative action may be temporary in nature, but in order to achieve and make sure the effectiveness of and efficiency of the affirmative action, we need to include a range of different interventions, and many of which will not be temporary in nature. They would be permanent. And So what do we need to have in order for affirmative action for gender equality at workplace to be successful? And remember, if we want to make it temporary, we want to achieve it as quickly as possible, then we don't need affirmative action. But in order to sustain and also expedite the progress in achieving that the initial goal that we set for the affirmative action, we need a range of interventions. First of all, we need an enabling environment. So if your organization say that I'm going to introduce affirmative action to increase the number of women in leadership positions, that will require a change to take place beyond your own organization context. It would help to have a legal context that will, ensure that private sector companies will work on improving gender balance. For example, I mean, just to say, for example, in our UNDP office in Sri Lanka, reviewed the legal framework to ensure that any interventions to promote gender equality at workplace and gender balance at workplace will be adhered to the legal framework of the country, and they will work as an incentive. And also, if there is a policy requirement to make sure private sector companies need to have a certain proportion of female employees and certain proportion of male employees and many other, types of employees for the diversity objective, if that is a policy requirement, that can work also as an incentive as well as a for the lack of a better word, imposition. That's not very positive, but anyway, so policy and legal framework would be helpful, but also there is a need for social norms change. So you may have that policy in your own company and you want to recruit many female employees. Let me give you an example of my own country, Japan. We have universities in Tokyo, the metropolitan city. They want to attract more female students. What did they have as an obstacle? Parents thinking sending their daughters to the big metropolitan city is not safe. So they don't want to send their daughters to Tokyo. You need to have the change in the social mindset to make that, so that your company have access to a bigger pool of female talent. So, for your own affirmative action to be successful, you need to be looking at environment beyond your own companies, which will be working as an incentive and opportunity for you to achieve your own objective. And the range of actions that you can take in addition to your affirmative action to achieve better representation of women and men. You could be introducing a range of different interventions, and that can be one is about increasing the number of women in leadership positions. So, we are quite successful in many countries in achieving gender parity at lower or mid levels, but when you get to the CEO level or boardroom, we start seeing the number of women dropping. So we do need to be implementing interventions to increase the number of women in leadership positions that can, that can involve different practices like a particular training or mentoring programs and so on. We could also be looking at gender pay gap. Why? Because we want our workplace to be attractive to women and men. If there's gender gap, pay gap, then women wouldn't be wanting to work for your company. So you would be missing out on talented women. So that's another area that you can introduce different interventions. Another area is looking at how we can break the glass ceiling as well as glass wall. So breaking glass ceiling and shattering glass ceiling is about getting women into leadership positions, but also we often have sectoral segregation. Some jobs are more occupied by men, some jobs are more occupied by women, and it's very difficult to cross those lines. So another set of intervention could be considered for breaking glass walls. And then work-life balance. There are tons of examples of how to make sure all employees, and this is not only for women, all employees can maintain better work-life balance to make them happy employees. And they would want to work for your company. And they would want to do their best for their workplaces. And so it's not only for women. This is another a common mistake of many for many people, that they think work-life balance is for women, but it's not. And then another area to look at is communication. And I think I understand that one of the panelists belongs to the male champions for change. That kind of, I mean, communication can mean many things, but that kind of statement, male champions for change, is a big statement, and it can influence internally and externally the way that people think of gender equality. And that's very important intervention. And then, of course, we do need to look at sexual harassment. There's zero tolerance is a must, and there are different ways of addressing sexual harassment and removing such acts from your own workplaces. So that's another area where the efforts should be included to support that affirmative action to improve gender balance in composition of your staff. So that's just a quick overview that I thought I might talk about. And happy to have a more conversation later on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Koh. That was great. I know in a very, very short time, you were able to give us a very clear understanding of steps that companies can take and what is important here in terms of a short-term and long-term action plan. We have lots of questions for you, which we will take at the end. And I'd like to hand over to Mr. Bhatia Bulumul now to share what action they've taken and some of the strategies from the plantation sector and from your organization. If you could share case studies and what your course of action has been.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, UNDP Network Sri Lanka, for inviting me to address this webinar today. As I come from a highly intense female population working environment in Sri Lanka, I think it's very appropriate me to discuss our business case on gender equality. I'll just give a brief introduction to my company. I work for a plantation company which has 8,800 hectares. We are 23 years old. We are one of the regional plantation companies which was privatized in 1997. And we are one of the most diversified plantation company among all 22 plantation companies. Without being only on the core business, we have diversified into various aspects, beyond our core business, like renewable energy, specialty tea manufacture, berry cultivation, ecotourism, likewise, so many other areas. Adventure park will be opening up, the first of a kind of an adventure park in Sri Lanka. So we are one of the highly diversified companies in Sri Lanka in the plantation sector. Getting into the female representation of our company, we have 5,152 numbers of employees, out of which 53 are female. Out of this employer lot, we have the estate workforce who are really working hard out in the field. It's around 4,700 numbers, out of which 56 are female. Basically, our company is highly depending on the female population, because they are the people who are breeding bread and butter to this company. They are the harvesters, who are plucking green leaf in the field. They are the people who are working in the factory. They are the people who are harvesting rubber latex in the field. So we highly depend on the female workforce. So it's a right duty of our company to look after this female workforce, because highly depending on them. Since until 1984, the plantation workers are paid a different kind of salary. Females are paid a lesser salary compared to male workers. In 1994, that was brought to 1-to-1 ratio. Now everyone is paid alike, the same salaries, whether you are male or a female. We have been able to manage the out of the workforce to bring people into supervisor category and to Kankani category among these female workforce. And we have 13 estates in our company. Out of the 13 estates, 7 estates officers are run by very efficient female partners in our society. So as a company, we if I take the last year, we have spent something like 118 million on the estate community development, and altogether 314 million on investment on CSR activities. I'll go on to the areas that which we have implemented in our company, and we have championed it. The one area, as you all know, the estate community is highly condensed workforce, depending on their male partner most of the time. In the past, the salaries drawn by the female worker is being taken away by the male. For the pay table, only the husband comes, and he used to take the salary of the female worker and go. And end of the day, basically the female worker, after hard working for 1 month, basically get nothing to her hand, and husband manage the whole the financial at the home front. But we changed the system. We introduced the banking facilities to female workers and open up, not only to the female workers, to all our workers, and introduce bank accounts to all workers, where their salaries are gone to the bank, and there's no way of the male worker grabbing the salary of a female worker. We have been successfully implementing this, and it's the female workers, I think, have got this independence on their financials by this aspect. Then also, we have gone into corporate. Every plantation, we have a estate work housing cooperative society. That society run a cooperative shop. Society does manage the finance of these people when their emergency requirements come into effect. In plantation, generally, these people get debted to money lenders for a very high interest rate. Whereas it goes up to sometime 20% interest per month, that is 240% interest per annum. Those are the rates the money lenders lend for these poor workers. So our company has come forward and introduced this estate work housing cooperative system in all our 13 plantation, and they are very strong. We have certain plantation which has over 4 million deposits in their banks. So with this money, they give soft loan and long-term loans to these people for their day-to-day requirement, for their weddings, their funerals, their functions, for anything. They can get at a very, very nominal rate a loan facility from their own money. This is, and end of the year, the profits have been distributed among the members of this the society. And also, we have been able to manage our workforce by educating them on the financial literacy and household cash management. We as a company, with the help of many NGOs, have been educating our female workforce on many of these aspects, and given them the awareness of managing their finance well. In the past, this community has a weakness of spending more than what they generally earn. To take an example, when they have a function, a child getting a big girl or something like that, they continuously, celebrate for three days, and the parents won't come for 1 week, and spend their 1 year income in an aspect like that, which is not at all a requirement, and they become highly debted to someone in the society. So we have been managed to convince them and change their mindset, and uh, bringing them into a good mainstream in managing their finances. And also alcoholism among the males and females both were one of the problems that we had on the plantation. So there again we have been able to manage by educating the workforce on prevention of alcoholism, then also on how to tackle your domestic problems that occurs in their domain. So this type of things have been brought into the system by changing their mindset, and we have been able to change this situation up to a very great extent in the plantation sector. The other support system that I'm trying to tell you, as a plantation company, we are one of the industry that look after our workforce, not only the workforce and their children. This community, start working 7 o'clock in the morning, and unlike working somewhere else, they don't have any communication with the family, with their children until they come back for lunch or they get back in the afternoon. So as a company, in all our plantations, every plantations, we have a thing called creche. We In the good old days, it was called Pulle Madu, where the child is being kept in a hut is called Pulle Madu. We changed this concept, and now we are calling is child development centers. It's not a creche where you look after the child, but you educate the child and develop the child's mind before they goes into the school. In the child development center, you have the rest areas, the preschool education areas, and the play areas, all that. And we have diploma qualified child development officers who are managing these child development centers. And in our company, we have 40 odd child development centers looking after our workforce and their children. And also we carry out free clinics to all the women on our estate, all our mothers, antenatal clinic, postnatal clinic, well woman medical clinic, and we have ambulance and transport available for emergencies, the women to go into the closest hospital. And also we have in-house medical officer in each and every estate. Some estate, if the estate is small, the adjoining estate medical assistant do visits 3 days per week to look after. And all our estates have a midwife and a family welfare officer who looks into the welfare activities, and also the midwife into mother's requirement. Also, we do screening for hemoglobin levels on the estate people, and free folic acid tablets is given to correct this situation. And also we provide transportation to our workforce where they are working in distance areas. Morning and evening transportation is provided. Also in the rubber estate, in the good old days, the rubber worker after tapping had to carry that heavy bucket with latex, maybe 500 meters or 1 kilometer to the factory. We have stopped this tedious exercise, and now we are sending a vehicle up to their working place. If they are tapping an area, the vehicle goes up to their working place, and the field officer take over their produce and release the worker from the field itself without allowing them to carry this heavy bucket of distance. So likewise, we are making their life easy and making them a happy workforce on our plantations. As a company, we do a lot of CSR activities. We are, helping all differently able children in the company. We are helping our orphans in the company, all female widows in the company. So there are so many activities that we carried out, and providing midday meals for our children, providing opportunities for career progression. We have majority of our staff are children of our workers from the workers' families. So to end this, I would say having 56% of our workforce in the company as females, it's our bounden duty to look after this biggest asset in the company. We are embedding health and well-being at the heart of our business strategy, as our workforce is our greatest asset. Also, we recognize a healthy and happy, committed workforce is a vital to our business success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bulumulla. That was really enlightening. There were some really important pieces there in terms of childcare, in terms of health and well-being, financial literacy, all things that bring together what companies can do to encourage more women to stay in the workforce, to be able to work, men and women both to have a decent quality of life and participation in their families, all things that really support better work-life balance. So thank you for sharing that. I'd now like to hand over to Nadisha. Nadisha, we'd really like to hear about the Unilever case study. You've got impressive numbers in terms of representation when it comes to senior leadership. You set targets and have some very, very interesting strategies and action that you've put in place. So please, Nadisha, share with us.
Thank you so much, Thanuja, and also Janani and the UNGC. So it was really great to start by hearing from Koh, from Japan as well as Asia point of view, and then from Mr. Bulumulla from the real at a real nitty-gritty level of our country, the challenges women are facing at certain levels. So let me bring a different point of view into the discussion from a global perspective, which is where we are operating from. So Unilever has operations across 190 countries, and our reach of the global population is around 2.5 billion out of the 7 billion population. So statistics shows that 4 out of 10 houses in the world has Unilever product, and we have been around for 120 years. So there's a huge corporate social responsibility organizations of that nature can bring to the world, and that is exactly what we are interested in. So Unilever's purpose stems from having making sustainable living commonplace. The idea being businesses can flourish only if the environment and the people also develop in a sustainable way, and we make progress in all levels. And to do this, we call out 3 levels of purpose. We say companies with purpose. Last, brand view we have about people, not only the people who are working with us, like Koh mentioned, even the people in the society, including the consumers. 70% of our consumers are women to start with. And for us, it's very important that equality and belonging becomes the cornerstone of whatever we do. For years, we looked at bringing in diversity into the organization, and that is, while gender is number 1, it's also across disability and various other forms of ethnicity and so on, diversity elements. But what we have now realized is diversity alone won't work. It is like being invited to the party, but unless you are asked to dance, it doesn't really work. So belonging, making people feel they belong, they are valued, they are respected, makes the difference between contribution and just being a passenger on the bus, so to speak. So equality and belonging is fundamental for us. And 10 years ago, globally, we announced the intention to be 50-50 gender balanced across the organization. And as the years rolled, the leadership realized how hard it and then came to this insight that if a change has to happen, it has to happen from the senior levels of leadership. And while the 50-50 gender balance number remains, in the last few years, the target got refined into 50-50 gender balance on an immediate basis at senior leadership level. So that's exactly in line with some of the learnings that Koh was mentioning at the beginning. And with this proportionate focus on grooming and accelerating talent to bring this balance at leadership level, we have achieved it globally as well as locally. So today in Sri Lanka, at Unilever Sri Lanka, our management committee or the local board is 56% female, starting from the chairperson across the various board members. For us, our challenge remains at the general managerial level, where the numbers are at around 36, getting close to 40%. But with a large pool of employees in supply chain, especially in the engineering functions and in sales, we find that at the general managerial level, we need to really raise the bar and really progress. So over the last 10 years, what we have found was that many affirmative action has really led to certainly progress. And the first one, which I would like to call out, is having targets set at very senior levels. So usually people can find having targets on things like this to be surprising, or there can be resistance. In the case of Unilever, the target was announced at the most senior level, at the global level. And then the regional and country level CEOs took on those targets and were leading the achievement of those targets with annual reviews and real accountability behind the numbers. So that was one reason. And for the last 10 years, that has been the case. And it's such a, after 3-4 years in the system, it became such a normal thing to have a target on achieving a gender balance in your function and in your team. However, it's not a mindless, because we have to be careful about these kind of hard measures, as we need to also question what is it that we are trying to achieve. So whenever there is a vacancy or a promotion opportunity, it doesn't mean that if there is a gender balance gap, that it will be filled by a certain gender. That's not what it means. What it means is that we will ensure there's a balanced slate of CVs, of candidates that we will review. At the interview process, the gender balance target gets removed, and then the focus is purely on the quality of the conversations and really recruiting the right person for the right job. However, for the interview screening, that is where we look at getting a balanced slate of candidates. And if that balanced slate is not there internally, we will then look for those candidates externally. And really having enablers, just like in the plantation sector, which was just now presented, having the facilities for creche and childcare, lactation facilities. In addition, we have flexible working being introduced in India 10 years ago. And in March, when the country suddenly went into lockdown, we were equipped to instantaneously start working from home, because it has been a practice, especially keeping in mind the young mothers and fathers who need that support when it comes to having small children and so on. Location-free working is also something that we practice, while flexible working can depend on the nature of the job. Location-free working is also another huge advantage people have, and it's open for both men and women, as we believe in equality in whatever we do. Another important aspect that we very seriously pursue is fair wage, and we do an audit every year to really scrutinize and look whether there is any kind of discrimination, whether it is gender or experience or age, because we have a work grade that dictates salary blocks. And other than that, there needs not be anything else coming in the way. So the annual fair wage audit is something we take very seriously. Also, Koh was mentioning about the other implications that women face in the workforce, including sexual discrimination and so on and so forth. So we have a code, a line that can be called anonymously whenever a person feels some unfair treatment has happened, and that is open for everybody. And every year people are trained and encouraged on the code of principles we live by, which is for fair treatment for everybody. Everyone should be treated with respect. And that is something we hold quite dearly in the way we work. Having an employee assistance program was also something that was launched a couple of years ago. And now this year particularly, we see its importance with the more possibilities of isolation and so on that can take place as we move on. Other than for supporting employees in this manner, we also launched Project Saubhagya, which is Unilever Sri Lanka's national initiative to support the economic inclusion of women. Here we reach out to rural ladies who would like to be entrepreneurs, where they can do door-to-door selling of Unilever products. And they are trained in sales skills. They are also trained in financial management. And it's an entire pool of sales cadre that has been developed in this manner to take it forward. And so in the brief that I was given from the UNGC, I was also requested to share what went wrong and what could have been better. When we look at 10 years of effort put into this space, for sure, I would call out top leadership commitment, senior leadership, calling it out as a business priority, really explaining to the employees the business prerogative behind it, the reason that we are following it so carefully, and then showing the credibility of it by taking on targets, and those are serious targets that can impact your annual performance, increments and bonus at a very serious level. Those are things that really help. And then putting in the infrastructure and other enablers in place. So if you take the maternity leave policy, which we have 6 months, and the paternity leave, which is for 3 weeks, as well as we have career break opportunities for both men and women to pursue either higher education, or if you just want to take a break, that is all allowed in the whole realm of well-being. So if you look at all of those have been really great things, which has made us quite an employer of choice, if you say so. The place where we could have done better is in really areas where traditionally it hasn't been female domains, like mechanical engineering in the factories, for example. Or what we find is, so when it comes to mechanical engineering, we find not sufficient numbers of ladies are available to start with. But when you take a function like sales, we find there are abundant number of ladies who are qualified who are not necessarily interested in a career in sales for the various reasons that come with sales. And what we have found is when we come together as a network, like we are now in this UNGC Target Gender Equality Group, we find that there are many like-minded companies with similar agendas and similar challenges where we can actually come together and find solutions at perhaps a national level, which will really help progress the whole gender agenda forward. So let me pause there, Janani, and hand it back to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nadisha. That was fantastic because it really tied in a lot of what Koh started off with in terms of targets, but also having long-term action plans and sustainable policies and infrastructure, which is really evident in the Unilever case. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for also sharing some of the struggles. We have more questions, and I'll ask, and I'm sure the audience also has questions at the end. So let me hand over to Troy. Troy, we'd really like to understand the Champions of Change strategy and what the impact has been like. If you could tell us what the program is and what you've seen in terms of impact and examples.
Sure. Thanks, Thanuja. I'm very happy to share all of that. I think I have 10 minutes, so I'll be swift. It's a really great pleasure to be with you, joining you from Canberra in Australia, which of course is the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I'll pay my respects to Ngunnawal elders, past, present and emerging. I'm here talking with you today about the Champions of Change Coalition, and I'm going to start using our new name, which literally landed 2 days ago, or yesterday actually. After 10 years as the Male Champions of Change, the strategy has rebranded quietly as the Champions of Change Coalition, and I'll explain as I speak with you about what that evolution is about. MCC, I'll talk about Male Champions of Change as MCC, originally began as men of power and influence, so men in CEO roles or board roles, stepping forward or stepping up beside women to take accountability for gender equality in their organisations. It was founded in Australia in 2010 by our then Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Elizabeth Roderick, who of course is now the chair of the UN's Committee on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, Special Rapporteur at the UN, but still with us, still our founder at Champions of Change. And so we get the great privilege of working with Liz almost every day when she's here. Members in MCC or in the Champions of Change cover every major sector of the economy. They include representatives from business, government, community, academic and not-for-profit organisations. We have just over 250 CEO or board level leaders now. The group began with just a small founding group of about 8 leaders, and over the decade has expanded beyond the founding group to now encompass 17 groups, with employees in 155 countries around the world, notwithstanding, of course, that most of those people are in Australia. They're also in some of our global or international groups, which include markets such as Pakistan, Philippines, and the Global Tech Group, which is centred mainly in the US and the UK, but those global organisations have people in lots of different places. Let me see, about 1.5 million employees covered by Champions of Change organisations. They're all supported by implementation leaders. So the model is such that the CEO is supported by someone either in their senior team or very senior in their HR function, taking care of gender equality and diversity to support the implementation of the work. Let me see, what else can I tell you? So I might explain the name change. So as interest in the strategy has developed over time, and the coalition and its work has expanded, members and our partners collectively agreed that the strategy had evolved to a point that the name Male Champions of Change was really no longer appropriate, especially as many of our members were working side by side with many women leaders to accelerate progress. And in fact, interestingly, as the strategy has developed, many of the original Male Champions of Change have actually been succeeded in their CEO roles by women. which is really, kind of the ultimate goal, I suppose. Not to do all the men out of their jobs, but but certainly to see more balance at CEO level. So as women's representation among the coalition grew, it didn't make sense anymore to have the male tag. And so in 2020, in fact, yesterday on the 7th of December, marking our 10th year, the members supported a name change to the Champions of Change Coalition, with the tagline, "Men stepping up beside women on gender equality." Now, I couldn't even tell the organisers about that change in advance, I think, because we would have had to reveal it in the list of speakers. But you can all go to the website, the Champions of Change Coalition, all one word, .org, which has all of the latest information, all of the reports, all of the detail of the members, etc., on there. And when I say all of the information, I mean that the Champions of Change themselves, in their own organisations and in the groups that they've formed, are all about listening and learning about what's going on in their organisations, and then leading with action to progress gender equality and, importantly, share what they've learned quite openly. There's, it's all open source content, all available, so that others can adopt or adapt the approaches that they've taken. Let me just tell you about the groups quickly. So the founding group was a cross-sector group. We had an airline, we had a bank, we had a telecommunications company, all of the biggest companies in Australia, as well as the Chief of Army, the head of the public service, and others. So covering a range of sectors in that national group. And since then, some sector-based groups have emerged. So we have a group in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths. We have the fire and emergency group. We have a sport group, property, architecture, what else? I said fire and emergency, health, insurance, and our first ecosystem-based group, which is the Microsoft Partners Group. So Microsoft and all of its partners in Australia have formed a group to tackle their gender equality issues as well. And all of the champions are bound by some guiding principles and some objectives, which I'll just quickly run through the guiding principles. The first one is to step up beside women, so men taking accountability for change. The second one is to prioritise progress on women's representation, so set targets and crystallise intent for change. Stand behind their numbers, so they share their lessons learned and they're very transparent about progress. And in fact, this Friday, it's a big week for us. This Friday, we're releasing our annual impact report, which covers all of the members and has loads of detail. It's about 200 pages long. All of the detail of the work that the champions have been doing, and importantly, the measurable impact of that work over the past 12 months. I should point out, since we have a Unilever friend here, of course, that Unilever Australia and New Zealand is part of one of our groups too. So you'll see some information about what Unilever has been achieving. The fourth guiding principle, of course, is that the champions are there to shift the system, and they avoid solutions that put the onus on women to adapt. So it's not about fixing women, it's about changing systems inside organisations. Some of the measurable objectives that they have are to, of course, achieve gender balance and women's representation in leadership. And for the champions, gender balance is between 40 and 60% women's representation. Gender balance overall, gender balance in recruitment and promotions, closure of the gender pay equity gap, reported levels of employees' access to flexible work, which of course was very popular and important during COVID, and employee engagement measures that reflect an inclusive employment experience. So this, and of course, fewer men and women leaving employment during or at the end of parental leave. So, so they're all the measures. And as I said, you'll see all of the detail around those in the impact report that's coming. Let me give you a preview, perhaps, of some of the impacts. Can I do that? I think I can do that. I won't talk exact numbers because this is all sort of embargoed, but maybe I could give you a hint. So across, is that okay? Yeah, good. Okay, across the 10 years, what we've seen is, in terms of action, quite a significant increase, more than 90% actually, having formal policies in place for preventing and responding to sexual harassment at work. Around 90% having flexible access to parental leave. So that's basically the same leave for men and women in their organisations. Over 90% mainstreaming flexible work. And what else is good? Around 80% taking approaches to address domestic and family violence as a workplace issue, which is one of the Champions' groundbreaking pieces of work that they did in 2015. In our report, you'll also see measures around the number of Champions organisations who have moved closer to gender balance since their baseline year, so since the first year they reported. Looking at women's promotions that are either gender balanced or greater than women's representation overall, gender balance in recruitment and whether or not that's had an impact on women's representation. And finally, of course, changes in women's representation in key management roles. That's a lot to pack into a short little spiel of 10 minutes, but I'm happy to take questions when we get to those in a moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Troy. That was really great, because I think for a lot of us, a lot of companies that are on this journey to actually understand how we find champions, male and female, in senior leadership positions to make commitments like what you spoke of. That it's because there is leadership buy-in, but the moment you sort of put a tag and sort of put a stake in the ground, there is a lot of accountability. So this is an amazing sort of program that with a fantastic reach that you've got. So that's amazing. Well done on that.
Thank you.
So we've heard from all four of our panelists, and we have some questions coming in. I have questions for all of you, but I'm first going to, we've got a question coming in from the audience, and this I will actually pose to maybe Nadisha and Koh, if you have anything to add to this. So the question is, in addition to the great affirmative actions mentioned, in light of COVID-19, what can companies do to create professional but family-friendly workplaces for women and mothers working from home? Nadisha, if you'd like to take that.
Yes. Thank you so much, Thanuja, and also for Amjad for asking the question. So a couple of things that we did. I think many companies, and especially those of you who are on the call, you have mentioned before. So we regularly check with people through calls as to what is the kind of support they need. And what we found was a couple of things. There's a lot of cooking that needs to happen. And during the lockdown, or when there is a heightened transmission happening like now, you don't have your domestic support, and that therefore the responsibility falls mostly on the lady. Secondly, when there's online schooling, again, we find that mothers with young children, they find that their really young children don't have the discipline of sitting in front of the laptop and listening to the teacher, and the mother has to be involved. So we found that women and young mothers, for these two reasons, were getting quite stressed, and we wanted to find a solution. As the lockdown happened in March and people went into working from home, most of you on the call would have heard and have experienced yourself that people just started working around the clock. There was no start time and there was no end time. And that really didn't help women who had to run the family as well, particularly without the support that they usually had. So therefore, we brought in what we called rituals. One ritual was very strictly, which we wanted to enforce, was weekends are mine. And second was no meetings after 6. and also a lunch break from 1 to 2, so that people find some sanity. And it might sound really strange, but we even encourage people to not start meetings before 9, because people were saying that meetings can start as early as 7 a.m. and go on till very late in the night. So these kind of rituals brought some sanity to the process, especially for, I wouldn't, majority women, but there were also some men who were really helping out with really young children. So that was mainly one area where we helped. The second, I would say, is also the mindset. And I think we all need to understand that having unconscious bias is a very human thing. And if any one of us say that we don't have bias, that itself shows how far we are from the truth of how humans function. And the more education, and course touched on this on communication, you need regular communication to remind people that different people will have different challenges. And the society has changed a lot. During this whole lockdown period, we came across young men who are caregivers, which, you know, you think in a somewhat of a traditional society that that's not the case. So the whole equality and empathy mindset that we need to bring, and also to be open-minded, and be really staying close to the people and asking them how they really are is very important to find solutions. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Nadisha. Any of the other panelists want to add to that? Mr. Bulumulla, Troy, or Koh, anything you've seen in terms of what companies have been doing during the pandemic?
Yes, I think what has already been shared covers a lot of the interventions, the practices that were introduced. One thing that taken by quite a few companies is to reduce the risk of domestic violence. When the lockdown started, it had come to attention that, you know, the risk of domestic violence had increased for many survivors, and some companies took it upon themselves to, you know, provide support packages in which they include places where they can go to get help. In a lockdown situation, of course, asking for help is very difficult because you can't physically go out, but, you know, information was given to all employees what they can do to if they face domestic violence risks. So it's a message also given to employees saying we are here to support you. To, you know, that was very important. Another thing was to provide computer or similar devices. You know, in a household, they may not have enough computer for all members, where children may also need to work on it, and parents also need to work on it, and there isn't enough. So that was also a measure that's taken. And this, in order to combat this increased care work at home, some of actually offices of UNDP around the world started having sort of not competition exactly, but kind of showing what fathers or male colleagues are doing, trying to show off what they are doing. It's an incentive, you know. Yes, we are also doing housework, and to you know, it's also a communication strategy. And one last thing I might mention is to, you know, some offices also organize social activities during working hours, which involve, which you, if you like, you can involve your children. So you can, you know, like maybe dance exercise or something like that, which was also good to, you know, keep the family context happy as much as possible. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Koh, for that. Troy, did you want to add anything?
I won't add to the list of things except to say that the champs produced guidelines on flexible work, on looking at the whole COVID response through a gender lens on a range of factors, as well as resources to address or support employees experiencing domestic and family violence, all with a COVID focus. So I'll just pop the website link into the chat so that everybody can see that, and all those resources are there with great examples and case studies and all the things.
Thank you, that's wonderful. We have another question that's come in, and it's an interesting one because we speak of affirmative action and core. I think when we spoke just before we started, we were looking at what does it mean, this whole thing of is it preferential treatment or not? So the question is, it was highlighted that affirmative action does not mean preferential treatment. However, studies have shown that women are less likely to ask for more money when negotiating for promotions. I understand that this is not, if this is not monitored, some companies may find themselves in a situation where men are unintentionally compensated better than women. How can companies ensure that this will not be the case?
Yes, so the concept that affirmative action is not a preferential treatment is that actions are not meant to only aid or in the benefit of them. It's for the benefit of a bigger objective of gender equality. Currently, we don't have gender equality. Currently, we have women underrepresented in senior positions. Currently, we have women underrepresented in labor force. So the actions may seem like giving special treatment for women, yes, but it's not, it's not an action or with lack of evidence or lack of proper rationale or long-term planning. So this is why affirmative action is not a preferential treatment. And it's very true that many studies do suggest that women are not, women are less inclined to negotiate for promotion than men. So they may need to be reached out. Right? The company needs to go to women and say, look, we could be. Now, how bad is that? Why do, we expect a behavior displayed by male as a standard. And when women don't behave like men, then we think that we need to change it or we need to introduce something to correct that behavior. But if we don't think like that, okay, so some people go and ask for promotion, some people don't. Either way, it's the responsibility of a company to identify and celebrate and value the work that individual employees give. Then it becomes perhaps a natural solution for companies to go to the employees and say, look, you are doing great work, we'll give you promotion. So it's also the, just a different way of looking at it.
Thank you for that, Ko. I think that cuts across a lot of issues that come up in terms of the slightly different behavior patterns that we see. And sometimes maybe the responses we give as companies might be skewed, like you said, to what we are used to seeing as behavior and correcting those who don't behave in the same way. And maybe that's not the way to look at it. I do have a question related to that. Which is this whole question of merit. And when we talk about we only hire and promote for merit, which is an obvious thing, it has to make business sense. But could there be, again, a way we look at merit that has a gender lens?
In terms of recruitment or developing a team, many companies are now going for having diversity because they feel that it's good for business. For many reasons, it encourages creativity, or ever in some companies are saying in different studies, they seem to be a good thing for a company to have more diversity. Somebody mentioned also because it reflects the client base, and you need more women because you have many women customers. Yes, that also could be true. So when you recruit a person, but you are not, and if you just look at that particular position and say, I want the best person for this particular terms of reference, and if somebody said, no, you should choose the other person, even though the technical expertise may be less, but because that person will bring diversity to your workforce, and you may hesitate. But if that's because you're looking at the position only. Mm-hmm. But if you're building a team, if you're building an organization, then the criteria of your selection will be influenced by that approach. And from that perspective, having diversity is a objective for you, then that the way that you want to select a person for a particular position will also be different.
Understood. Thank you. Thanks, Koh, for that. There's a question for Troy. It says, how did Australia introduce paternity leave systems so effectively, which allows the mother to go back to work after maternity leave without having to compromise too much? Because in Sri Lanka, when women reach childbearing age, often their careers are disrupted. And paternity leave is not a legal requirement in Sri Lanka right now. So how was this introduced, and what have you seen in Australia?
Great question, and it's sort of the long journey, right? So the long journey of business and civil society and government all eventually realizing that if you actually have equitable conditions for everyone, and I realize we're talking mothers and fathers in sort of opposite sex households, but any kind of parent with any kind of child who might turn up in their life, how do we make sure that the people who need to take care of that child, one, can be there for the child, but two, can also do other things. So I think the introduction, particularly of paid parental leave, which also has been in place for about 10 years in Australia, was really the combination of business and government working together, really running the numbers, running the commercial case for making sure that, having gender equality at work, enabling people to do their parenting and their professional life was actually good for the economy. And then as that's developed over time, individual organizations have also run the numbers to see, well, okay, if we actually make the same amount of leave available for parents, whatever their gender, we'll retain people, we'll have great talent, we won't lose that talent if a child comes along and the person needs to take some time off. So I think a short answer is taking just a very evidence-based and commercial approach to what it really means for your business. We're fortunate in Australia to have a couple of things in place which have driven that focus. One is a government requirement for all private sector employers with more than 100 people to report every year to government on gender equality initiatives and workforce composition. So that reporting is now in its 7th year. And when you have to let your government know what's going on, or the consequences of that are not being able to get government contracts and being named in the parliament, this drives very good behaviours that give you an evidence base to take action. And the second thing that we have here is recommendations by the stock exchange that all listed companies need to set objectives for gender equality and publish the results of those objectives every year in their annual reports. That's quite separate from what we're doing at Champions of Change, but informed by and related to that. So again, when all of these things are in place and kind of working together, it becomes relatively less difficult for organisations to take a serious approach to things like parental leave. I might also finally mention, and I'll try and find the link and also post it in the chat, of some world first research that was produced this year by our Workplace Gender Equality Agency. They're the people that everybody has to report to. they did a study using their data, actually, their 6 years of data, and demonstrated the first causal link between gender equality in leadership and business results. So we all know about the correlation, but this data actually shows a causal link between those two things, and it's quite breathtaking. And you really can't argue, right? Because the numbers don't lie. So this is, again, another reason that serious business people and leaders and anyone who's trying to make their business successful needs to take this work seriously. And if they're not doing that, they're not operating in the best interests of their customers or their shareholders or their employees.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Troy. That was great. If you do find the link,
Just find it now. Yeah.
We'll look out for it anyway. Connected to what you just said and what we were talking about in terms of government support and intervention as well, there's another question to all the panelists. In the absence of government, for example, government intervention or support in terms of maternity leave costs, and because currently in Sri Lanka, for example, the employer funds the entire maternity leave portion. Other than, if you, in the absence of government intervention and certain policies in place, have you seen other family-friendly policies and things that have been put in place that help women, especially in that childbearing age, so sort of at that phase when we see most of the leakage and the dropout? Are there any other policies you've seen, things that have helped?
And I have one example. I mean, this is a very concrete and very sort of a practical example, and not at the policy level of a company, but it relates to policy level. So one company in Japan implemented a program where all employees, male or female, will receive a call and say, your child or your family member, whatever, you need to go home. And you just need to drop everything. So it's actually a training so that you drop everything and go home. And what kind of a business continuity plan that you can have. So it involves your own team. So who's going to back you up, and what are the plans in place, what mechanisms you have, and how it feels to be in that position. Because too often, if there is that call, say your child is sick, it's a mother who goes home, drops, and that's impact on the way that ability of mothers are wrongly perceived in a professional context. So let's everyone, men and women, with or without children, have that experience and understand what it's like. Then they can come up with a solution to accommodate the situation by themselves, as a team, as a unit, as an organization. So that practice, that drill, exercise sounds quite different from other types of interventions. I thought that was quite an interesting approach.
It is. Thank you. I think most of us don't see that when we think of business continuity planning and backup, and so that's fantastic. That's actually a great example. Thank you, Nadisha. I think you want to speak.
Yes. Thanks for that. Was amazing. Yeah, so I have 2 or 3 examples to share. So one is in Sri Lanka, and something that I also benefited from, which is after you take your maternity leave, as soon as you come back, it can be a bit of a shock, especially if you have taken a bit of extended leave. So we have, other than for the 6 months of maternity leave, you can also take no pay leave and extend your leave if you want to. So what we have as a practice is, for the first 2 weeks, you can come back on half day, just to ease into the whole thing and just get used to it. But there's an even more amazing practice which is available in many of the other Unilever countries, which we want to try ourselves, which is called job sharing. So 2 ladies, or a lady and a gent, the combination doesn't matter actually, depending on what you need. Is if you want to do a half day kind of a job, you can have 2 people on the job. with similar experience and training, of course, and really good ability to do handover, takeover seamlessly. But that works really well for people so that they can really manage the times that they want to work. Also, there was another beautiful option called Career by Choice. That is mainly it was taken on by new mothers where they want to take just a year or two off. And then when they're ready to come back, they didn't want to come back full time. So they were given the option to come back part time. And again, it was a win-win situation because for us, we valued these people a lot. And rather than lose them completely, we would like to get them back even part-time. And for them also, it was a brilliant way to come back. And many of them, after 2-3 years, they came back full-time. So it was more like, the first few years of the child until the child starts schooling, that is the most toughest. And then if that is then coupled with a daycare facility in your organization, it just helps so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadisha. Mr. Bulumulla, I'd actually really like to ask you, connected to that, you spoke of childcare facilities in the plantation sector, in Elpitiya Plantations, and what was that like when you introduced it with the community, with the men and women in the community, and how they took it up? What did you see?
Yeah, as I told you, this was the practice from good old days, from the foreigners' time. It was just a hut, with an old elderly woman to look after the children. At that time, it's called Pulle Madu, as I told you. Now, this concept would totally change over a period of time, and we realize the children of our workers requires better education, better way of living, and better nutritional condition at this place. Unlike in other industries, very sorry to say that we don't have any extended maternity leave for our female workers because they are all on daily paid category. That's why we have extending the facility, them to look after their children, from the day one that they start going to work until they come back. We give the full facility, and also on a situation where the child is very small, we engage this our workers close to the area where the children has been located. So they are given permission, 3 times a day to come back to the creche. We have feeding rooms to feed the children and get back. So during the period they are working, the early childhood days, we look after on behalf of the mothers. There's a very trained, qualified mother and an assistant to look after, and we have a separate area with mini beds to the children to sleep, and we provide food free of charge. So we give that aspect, unlike in the other industries. We look after our workers until they finish their work and come back.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time. So we have to wrap up. This conversation has been wonderful, and I think there's so much more to ask. Unfortunately, I have to let you all go. I'm going to ask Janani to share some final thoughts and close the session for us. But I do want to say thank you so much, Troy, Nadisha, Koh, and Mr. Bulumulla. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I wish we had more time because I think the audience also would have liked to engage for longer and ask more questions. But here's to more conversation, and hopefully all of us and all of our companies looking at setting tangible targets that we can drive towards. Hopefully with some of the examples and a lot of the inspiration we've had in this conversation, we can all look towards setting plans and targets for ourselves in terms of how to really drive this agenda in a practical and meaningful way. let me hand over to Janani to close the conversation for today.
Thank you, Thanuja. Thank you for an excellent job moderating. Thank you, everyone. So just in closing, firstly, I'd like to firstly thank Thanuja for an excellent job moderating. Thank you for accepting our invitation and moderating this very important session. I'd like to express my gratitude and thanks to our speakers, Ms. Koh Miyaoi from UNDP Asia Pacific, Mr. Bhatia Bulumulla from Elpitiya Plantations PLC, Ms. Nadeesha Wijesingha from Unilever Sri Lanka, and Mr. Roderick from the now name changed Champions of Change Coalition for joining us for this session. Thank you for your comments and your interventions. They were very interesting, and I think the audience also gained a lot of insight. I'd like to also thank our team, especially Mr. Ratika De Silva, who guides us to put these events together and also ensures that we do relevant and important content. Very special thanks must go out to Ms. Mariam Noordin, who is the intern heading our Gender and Diversity Working Group, for her very hard work in putting this together, and Mr. Amjad Asmir and Mr. Zachary Ortiz, who are our other two interns who have also assisted in this task. I'd like to thank our board members for supporting us in all our endeavors. And thank especially to all of you for registering and participating with us. So we hope to have similar sessions. So now that I have you, I must also say that we do also work in areas on climate emergency, on business and human rights, on sustainable finance, as well as sustainable supply chain. So please do connect with us. And we will be having programs on those areas, as well as gender in 2021 as well. So thank you very much. For anyone of your colleagues who missed this and would like the recording, please do be in touch, and I'm more than happy to share that as well. So once again, thank you very much for your time and for your patience with us. And I wish you all a good evening. Thank you, and we hope you'll join us in our next session as well. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Everyone, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.